All right, well, let's begin. Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today to take a look at the rapidly expanding telecom analytics market. My name is Dan Meyer. I'm Editor-in-Chief here at RCR Wireless News, and I will be moderating today's panel. So I thank everyone for joining us today. Joining me on the webinar today will be my colleague, Roberta Prescott, who recently finished up a report on this topic and will provide some insight into that report. You can also check out that report on our website at rcrwireless.com. Also joining me today is Justin Vanderland, who is a senior analyst at Analysys Mason, who will walk us through a presentation looking at the telecom analytics market. And finally, we have Chris Checco, who's a CAO of Razorsight, a company participating in the telecom analytics market. There's a list of our panel members there. And also, if you have any questions for any of us, we will have a Q&A session at the end of this webinar, hopefully the final 10 minutes or so. We'll try to get to some questions. But if we don't get to some of your questions, or if you have some later, please feel free to send an email off to any one of us there with our email addresses. So again, thanks a lot for joining us today. So to kick this off, I wanted to bring on Chris from Razorsight first to provide just a little bit of insight into the telecom analytics market. And how it views the importance of the market. So, Chris, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you very much, Dan.
Great. Well, yeah, if you want to just give us a quick overview, that'd be great.
Sure. Thank you. So just give you a quick overview of Razorsight and the overall market. So Razorsight provides a cloud-based analytics platform for the telecommunications industry. We've been in business for over 10 years and really servicing clients across wireless, wireline, as well as MSOs. We really focus in a few areas, in really unlocking actionable insights into revenue generation, revenue retention, and cost containment. We've been in the big data business and the cloud business effectively since inception, before they were even terms in the industry. And what we're seeing in the industry today is that by using big data analytics, there's a lot of benefit that organizations can glean from these platforms and offerings. First, around revenue generation, we see our clients generally generating revenue up to 1% to 2% of their base. And that's really, again, using predictive analytics within the cloud, effectively increasing the size of the pie. So finding either replacement revenue for revenue that's being lost, say, for instance, in the SMS world, where SMS usage is generally declining, being taken over by over-the-top offerings, as well as generating new types of revenue, effectively cross-selling and upselling and increasing ARPU. In the revenue retention space, we're typically seeing, again, uplift in terms of benefit from predictive analytics on the big data platforms in the 5% to 15% range. And that can include things such as propensity analysis to understand which customers are dissatisfied and likely to leave, root causes, revenue leakage, provisioning leakage, and things of that nature. And then finally, on the cost containment side, we're typically looking at around a 2% to 5% improvement. And again, using things like root cause analysis to identify other areas of generally where cost is exceedingly high. For instance, in calls to care as an example. So when we look at the big data space, we've got a number of clients across the industry, about 70 clients currently, but some of the larger providers like AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, Comcast, et cetera. And what we've found has been very beneficial for us is bringing together big data experts, so folks that actually really understand the big data space, but specifically in the telecommunications market, because it's fairly unique from other markets. Using the advanced analytics and what we would call as predictive analytics to take the big data platform and all that volume of data from those various sources and applying predictive analytics and advanced analytics to really extract the value and monetize the value of that information. By going with a cloud-based approach, we found that we avoid some of the common pitfalls of implementation. So, for instance, there's no software to buy, no capital expenditure. You don't have to worry about systems integration and long life cycles. It's fairly quick time to value. And we find that there's substantial savings delivered. We, as an organization, guarantee an ROI, typically sitting on top of those existing systems. And we've been fortunate enough to have effectively 100% renewal rate from our clients over the last 10 years. turn it back over to Dan. Thank you, Dan.
Perfect. Thanks much, Chris. Appreciate the insight there. And definitely it seemed like a pretty hot topic. Thanks for some of the points you touched upon there. I know from attending the recent CTIA show, a lot of the things that you touched on were definitely topics of conversation from some of the carriers I spoke with at the event. So we definitely appreciate that insight there, Chris. Thanks so much. Well, now I want to bring on my colleague, Roberta Prescott, to provide some insight into the report that she recently completed on the topic. So Roberta, please, I guess, walk us through some of the findings you found from the report.
Thank you, Dan. So hello to everyone. Well, when we talk about telecom analytics, we see how carriers can address their demands by using analytics tools. Indeed, they are pressured today to better know their customers. In a very competitive market, telecom operators need to find out more personalized offerings and come up with a service that will retain their subscribers and increase their revenues. It's not something easy to do. It's easier to talk, I know. And these environments become even more complex with the launch of LTE networks because it adds much more data demands. For the future report, then mentioned earlier, it's already released at rcrwireless.com. For this future report, I interviewed about 20 sources to write it. And what I heard is that telecom operators have been using some analytics for a while now. But what's coming next and what's really exciting at this moment is to analyze data from many kind of sources, including, for example, source data from their network, data for their customer service, such as CRM, and also data from customers' device, so how their subscribers are using, are consuming their data, how they are interacting, what kind of usage they are doing. And the tipping point right now, as you see, is to do that real time. Next slide, please. So in this scenario, we see a lot of challenges. And what I heard a lot is that before adopting any kind of strategy, carriers need to know what they want to analyze and why are they doing that. Because there are many vendors tools to do that, but they have to create, to know what they want to, what they aiming to, so they can get business value from the data. And of course, as I mentioned before, this is not something easy, but they can do this to improve their campaigns, to make sure they are offering to their customers what they are asking for. And for example, they can use this analyzed data to come up with solutions to right person and prioritize offerings. They can pick it up who are the best values customers, for example. Next slide. And when we talk about telecom analytics, it's much more about how to put data from several sources together, what we call big data, and how to analyze them to better understand. And when we say about putting all this data together, it touches CIO's role, for example. So where carriers are storing this data and how they are managing all this data in a middleware layer, for example. As you can see, there's some trends right now. Many of them, they talk about this real-time solutions. So most sophisticated and real-time analytics solutions, as well as tools to manage big data, have been hailed as next technology trends. And what I heard a lot is that carriers have been done very good to understanding the past, but they know they will have to understand what's coming next, so they can predict the future and provide what customers want before they need it. There are some telecom operators that have been doing this, some that has some that has adopted some solution. Justin will show us later. And among challenges to finish, I would say that there are a lot of IT challenges as well as marketing challenges to understand what they want to come up to understand from all this mining data and how they are going to store this data and what kind of data they are getting, how they are getting data from their network and how they are getting data from customers' device. And when we talk about data, it's not only about structured data, such as what they can, such information they get from OSS or BSS systems, but also unstructured data, for example, data they get from social media, how people are interacting with carriers through Twitter to Facebook, and how they're going to respond it. So I would say it's a very exciting moment for analytics, and I expect to see many more carriers adopting or the whole analytics environment or part of this around the globe. Thank you, Dan.
Very good. We appreciate it, Roberta. Thanks so much for that insight. And like Roberta said, we do have a pretty extensive report on this topic on our website at rcrwireless.com. You can download that and get some more information on some of the findings that Roberta had in that report. So, like I said, a very good report. And also, I want to remind those of you who are listening in that if you do have any questions for either Chris or Roberta or for Justin who's coming up next, you can please feel free to use the question tab there on the GoToWebinar control panel. Just type your question in there. If you have a question for someone specifically, just put their name there in the question. And at the end, we hope to keep about the final 10 or 15 minutes to get to some of those questions. So please feel free to send those in, and we'll try to get to those at the end if possible. Well, with that, I want to move on next to Justin, who's with Analysys Mason, to provide, I guess, his view on this market, which again has been growing pretty rapidly over the past couple of years. So, Justin, welcome, and thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Thanks, Roberta, for setting me up. Okay, so I'm going to just run through. There's a few slides here, and I'll do them quite promptly.
No problem.
I'm going to run through basically sort of 6 quick areas, just basically looking at a little bit about what big data actually is, kind of why now, why is it happening at this moment in time, not earlier. What's it used for? We've touched on a little bit already in the webinar. Some key questions that operators are asking in terms of setting up this big data capability, and how do they need to, what sort of tools they need to employ to do it, and kind of what the results are. So it'll be fairly rapid, so I'll flick through it. So the next question really is, big data, and this has been widely described as sort of big volume, so that's just a huge amount of data, additional data over and above sort of the operational data which has really been used today. So in terms of different data sources being added into it, and we certainly touched on that earlier on. The velocity of it, so there's a whole heap of data which is very hard to consume and analyze in a sensible fashion, both in terms of its just sheer volume, but also the speed at which it's hitting the various processes which need to be analyzing it, describing it as drinking from the fire hose. And of course the variety, which touched on some of the things we talked about earlier on, which is both structured and unstructured data. Now the problem, of course, with unstructured data, it's very difficult to analyze. It needs to be structured, at least partially structured, in terms of what's going on. Also, that data is, particularly the unstructured data, is transient data. It changes very rapidly. What's going on in social media, for example, or going along within various social media blogs, etc. You want to find out straight away, and the value of that decreases very rapidly over time. So it's a real challenge for what goes on within operators. And I suppose the significant thing here really is that many operators that we talk to, of course, say, well, actually we've been doing big data for many years, but the challenge really is that there's been a real step change in terms of the amount of data and the velocity, and obviously the variety which is going on at the moment, and it's breaking current systems, so there has to be a change. So looking at the sort of the challenges in terms of the big data, and some of the key characteristics of it, shall we say. The processes for discovering patterns need to be looked at, the correlations and other analysis which goes with that. And of course, current tool sets which only deal with either structured data that deal with structured data today, standard BI tools, for example, do struggle with some of the new data sources which deal with that. Essentially, big data and analytics, analysis of that data is significant in terms of it can be applied to virtually any different use case. And really what it's being used for is augmenting current processes which are in play today. So whether that be things like churn analysis, the ability to go and look at more data more frequently and in more detail enables better business decisions to be made on those fronts. Unstructured data we talked about a little bit in terms of a whole heap of different types of data which is coming in, but the sheer volume associated with that, essentially some unstructured data was never looked at before by telcos. It was just discarded, or it wasn't even bothered looked for. So that whole volume of data comes into play where it hasn't done before. Analytics tools obviously have been in play for some time. The visualization, the modeling, predictive modeling have been around for some time. But again, some of these have to be extended in terms of the ability to look at new data structures, new data types, and the ability to do that in nearer real time as the requirements for the results from that analysis come actually into different process types. And of course, as I said earlier on, this does put pressure on current technologies. It means that some of those traditional data warehousing may not be able to handle the processing demands, the speed and type of data which they're currently dealing with. And that can be an expensive change which goes on. I suppose one of the key points to take away from this is that there's going to be no one type of technology which can deal with everything in its entirety. And quite often you'll see a change which is going on within the operators, which is looking at a sort of a hybrid environment of dealing with multiple different types of data, different use cases, and different technologies to deliver those within the market space. So next sort of question is kind of why now? Why analytics? Why big data? Why now? What's driving it all? Well, clearly, within the telecoms market, there are increasing pressures, and that's really been happening over a while. It's probably more prevalent now than it ever has been. So people are looking for new things to go and do. In terms of looking at operational costs as well. So that's sort of driving one aspect of it. Gone are the days where we looked at very developed markets providing continual growth within the market space. But added to that, and probably slightly more significantly, there are some nice drivers which are coming in, which are the massive reduction in costs in terms of being able to process a huge amount of data, store that data, and the tool sets which go alongside those to enable it to happen. So there's sort of a bit of a pivot which goes on in terms of being able to deliver this capability, whereas before it would have been extremely expensive to store the huge amount of data. And of course, the processing of that data would have pushed most of the business drivers or business cases in delivering it beyond the reach or sensible reach of any return you like to get on those models. So there's a nice pivot which has gone on that front. And that's really why now it's sort of taking place. So just to touch on some of the use cases, and there are lots and lots of use cases. I've broken these into, I think, 6 different segments, but really this page could have been filled with, literally hundreds of different types of things. And that's one of the things about analytics, and indeed any of the sort of analysis which goes on within this market space. It can be applied to virtually any process within the telecoms operator. Now, there are some key areas which are particularly interesting, and you're looking at some which are, more traditional, things like fraud management and revenue assurance, which have been around for some time. Those use cases are well understood, and there's some quite developed models in those spaces which enable those to be implemented relatively quickly. Again, within the marketing department, we're looking at customer segmentation, where it's moved from, as Roberta said, sort of simple things, which is basically segment on some fairly static data, which is based around things like age or maybe the packages which have been adopted by the various subscribers, through to information based about the usage patterns of those particular subscribers. So when they're using, indeed, the content that they're maybe looking at, the kinds of websites and stuff, obviously allowed, depending on where you are in the globe, to go and look at those sort of things. But it gives a far greater abundance of information about the particular users, which enable a micro-segmentation to take place. Added to that, you can look at further information in terms of, information about, for example, where people are on a particular website, and utilize that information to provide near real-time offers or triggers for real-time offers to go and maybe look at ways of preventing them from churning at that particular point. Some certain defined patterns. So looking at some of the predictability or predictable outcomes of various steps which people take, and model those and then apply that within a market environment. I will say that there are a huge number of use cases, but the ones which seem to be taking most traction at the moment are the well understood ones, so things like the fraud and revenue management ones, but also ones which are revenue generating. So we looked at the customer management ones, the customer marketing campaign based ones. But the interesting stuff, which is making people sit up and maybe take a little bit of interest, is actually ones on the right-hand side of this page, which is in slightly darker blue, looking at mobile advertising and market research data. So this is information which is sort of being used entirely internally within an operator, is actually exposing that to third parties. So there's a rich abundance of information which operators have, probably uniquely have, in terms of what people use, the kind of data sets they have in terms of their devices, the kind of content which they view, the kind of activity and call patterns, which is fairly unique to the operators. That information is very hard to get hold of. It's very hard to get hold of in a very reliable way from all the app vendors over the top. And there's a realization that has intrinsic value in both providing it for internal consumption in terms of operators using it for trying to sell additional services, their own services, but also exposing that to third parties. And you're seeing both in the US and indeed in operations across the globe, people exposing that information, opening up and allowing for third parties to deal with that. So we've got some quite interesting innovations in that space, based around, a lot of it's around location-based information, but it's profiling which is associated with that. So that was the sort of interesting areas which deals with it. So in terms of the operators themselves, there are a number of different things which CSPs or operators need to be asking themselves. And it came a little bit earlier on with Roberta, but the key thing is, what challenges are they trying to use analytics for? And
sounds like we might have lost Justin there. So hopefully Justin can dial back in. I guess while we're waiting for Justin to dial back in, I did have a question maybe for Chris. Chris, you're still on the line, I assume?
I am.
Great. Well, I guess one thing I wanted to ask is, I guess, can you maybe walk us through quickly, what it takes, like if carrier is looking to kind of do, a deployment, I guess, of an analytics, real-time analytics. I guess what's the general path for kind of doing that, and how should they, I guess, get started with kind of rolling out this sort of solution across their network?
Sure. So from a real-time analytics perspective, I think that first and foremost is actually identifying the need for real-time analytics. And I think there are a few places certainly where it is applicable. For instance, mobile advertising that Justin was talking about, as well as in the fraud arena. Secondarily, it's actually understanding then the data sources that need to be compiled and ensuring that you can get valid data sources, such as CDR data, in real time as required. So really shaping that information. And then third is really understanding what are the operational impacts to using those real-time analytics. So what I mean precisely is if you're looking, for instance, to identify potentially fraudulent activity, right? It's taking that information, understanding what's the intervention that's going to be used, and how is that intervention going to be delivered. Understanding what those downstream systems are and how you're going to interact with those, and ensuring, right, because obviously real time has some implications of stress or load that gets put on these systems, to ensure that those downstream systems are impacted as lightly as possible for those interventions.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Okay, that makes sense. Well, good. Well, I think we got Justin. Justin, are you back on?
Yeah, it just proves, doesn't it, that even the simple things in life, like telephones, don't always work.
That's always the thing. That's true. Well, yeah, I think we lost you just as you were starting this new slide here on the key questions.
Okay.
I'm curious to ask. So yeah, if you want to go ahead and continue with that.
Yeah, I'll pop down that. So, I mean, as I said, the critical questions really are, that any operator has to ask is, what challenges are you trying to solve? And in fact, even turning it around the other way, looking at various vendors who are addressing this particular market space, because there's this huge plethora of things which they can do in terms of use cases, it's always difficult trying to pick out where you're going to start. What I will say is that, I think gone are the days where a sort of a large platform-based cell where sort of enterprise data warehouses were deployed with the hope that they'll produce some value at some stage, which they have eventually done, but it's taken a long time to do that, have kind of gone. So we're looking at very targeted business cases with distinct applications and returns off of those particular deployments, which are actually critical in dealing with it. So the other thing I'd like to just touch on was the second point is the data needs for building. Sorry, back up one. Where the data needs is to build optimum analytics models, and this is critical because the underlying data models are dependent upon the different use cases. So if you're looking at a very complex data source, a complex analysis or analytics, which actually doesn't have to be delivered in real time, you've got a very different requirement set to something which has to be done in far more real time. And this has an impact in terms of the underlying technologies which you need to go and deliver those. There's a cost implication to dealing with that as well. And of course, the different vendors that you choose from that are going to be somewhat different in terms of dealing with that, which ends up essentially with the different use cases. You'll end up with a very distinct data requirement building on top of that. So it's quite key to look at the use cases and the tool sets you're dealing with in the same way. And finally, just on one of the points I'll pick out of there, and I'll move to the next slide, is just trying to understand the new data structures. The staffing structure is going to deal with this. Quite often, this is an enterprise-wide play. If you're looking at a sort of organized enterprise-wide strategy, it's going to change somewhat, and you want to maybe consider which particular staff types are going to be actually delivering this capability. Is it all going to be in one department? Is it going to be shared amongst multiple departments? And that seems to be quite a struggle for many operators. Now, here's quite a complicated side which has gone up, which is dealing with the different elements of the delivery. Basically, the thing breaks into 5 major parts. You're dealing with basically data acquisition, which is a major part of what goes on. Clearly, if you're trying to move things into real time, it puts a big pressure on getting data in a timely way into the data sets which deal with that. You've then got to load those, maybe got to transform them in some way to normalize it, push them into a data source, and then you've got to go and analyze them in some way. So there's quite a flow which goes on here. And the final part from the sort of in the middle there in terms of the analytics, there's 2 elements to that. One of which is executing on the models themselves. What are you looking at? If you're doing predictive modeling, of course, it's very important to build those models in there. It can be extremely complex in terms of the different variables you're picking up. And then you've got to expose those in terms of, do you want to push that into a report? Does it have to go into a portal? Does it have to actually go into a process? Does it have to be an inline process, so it's done in real time or in real time for that particular process element? And they've got to be exposed in different ways. So there's a whole heap of complexity which gets built into this. Just understanding what the data is, just understanding what the results are is only part of the equation. Being able to use that is absolutely critical. And mixing all that together makes for quite a complex environment. Now, you can, of course, for certain applications, have someone go do that for you, and they'll figure out the best possible business tool sets, the data sources, how to load it, what format they have to go in, and what technology is going to be used for best delivering that. But if you're looking at a platform play, as an operator, you'll have to consider a lot of these areas yourself and open and expose it up to consider all the different use cases which are listed out on the left-hand side. So I put a couple of examples at the back end of this report, and of course there are probably heaps more which one should be looking at. And these ones here are primarily looking at sort of marketing-based activities, which are kind of fun to look at. But you're seeing it's quite a widely distributed use case in terms of what's going on at T-Mobile. They're looking at sort of social media, for example, which touched on earlier on, which is taking a huge amount of data, building that into their CRM and information over the billing systems, which is able to basically look at churn. And churn obviously is a critical part of every single operator, being able to address even a proportion of that makes a massive difference. And they've got a very, in fact, T-Mobile have got a very sophisticated big data and analytics environment, which includes all sorts of vendors and tools which they pull together themselves. O2 Ireland have done an application which is looking at sort of essentially very targeted campaigns, trying to win back sort of activity based on prepaid SIMs, and trying to do some targeting on that. And again, it was looking at a huge amount of data. They did some activity based on location information, which is associated with that, and some information based on SIMs. And they try to pick those two things up and try to figure out the difference between different types of prepaid SIM players, which required them to figure out locations based with activity, propensity for use, etc., and not waste their time on a whole bunch of prepaid guys trying to upsell them further services, because they realized that actually they were just temporary residents or temporary visitors to Ireland. And I'll just pick out the last one. I mean, it was just a global telecoms out of Philippines, which came up with a nice figure of 112% increase in promotional related information to microsegmentation, which really goes back to my point earlier on that one of the major uses of this sort of technology is always going to be ways of promoting revenue generation more than anything else, even though cost cutting and cost optimization obviously is an important part. It seems to me that a lot of the major implementations have been really within the marketing department, marketing-based use cases. So I think I've rattled through that rate of knots. Thanks for your attention. I think now we got to hand it back to Dan for questions.
Perfect. Well, appreciate it, Justin. Thanks so much for the insight there. And obviously, you touched on a lot of topics there. Looking at I guess the real-time nature of this analytics and how important that is, and some good insights and some use cases there. So we definitely appreciate that insight there. And I recommend that anybody else who has any more questions for Justin, you can also follow up with them with the emails as well. Here's some other contact information for various offices there for Analysys Mason. So again, Justin, thanks so much for that insight there. Well, like I said at the beginning, I did want to leave some time at the end here for some questions from those listening in. Again, if you do have some questions for any of our panel members, please feel free to send those in using the question tab there on the GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll get to some of those questions. So please feel free to send those in. But again, let's start out. We do have a couple of questions that have come in. One of them, and this is probably targeted at either Chris or perhaps Justin, but someone is asking, is there any movement towards XMPP? I'm not exactly sure what that acronym means, but perhaps either Chris or Justin. Maybe Chris, if you have any insight on that, or if not, maybe Justin. I don't know, Chris, anything on that?
Sure. So, I haven't seen a movement. Sorry, it's extensible messaging and presence.
There it is. Perfect. Thank you.
On the phone, no problem. I haven't seen a large movement towards this yet. Although, obviously based on XML, it's a powerful medium. I have seen some movement towards PMML, which is predictive modeling markup language. There are a few providers, software tools, et cetera, that do support that. But I don't think the shift has quite occurred yet. I don't know, Justin, if you have any other insight.
Yeah, Justin, any insight on that movement as well?
I would probably agree with you entirely. I haven't really seen that. In fact, I would say probably, it's certainly been delayed. I haven't seen any sort of particular movement in that direction at this moment. Got
it. Okay, that sounds good. Let's see, and here's another question that came in. This one looks like it's targeted here at Justin. Let's see, there's a question. I guess they're asking about, why you mentioned that CDRs are unstructured. I guess what's your view on that?
No, CDRs shouldn't have. Well, okay, the CDRs are structured. I don't know if that was in the presentation or misunderstood. No, CDRs are very structured. What they deal with. They would, and I think, as you know, they're used very heavily within a lot of systems today already, not least
gotcha. Okay.
Billing.
Okay, that sounds good. I'll clarify that little situation there. Well, I think Roberta also might have some questions as well, maybe for you guys. So I'll let Roberta maybe come on. If Roberta, do you have any questions that you wanted to follow up with either Chris and Justin on this topic as well?
Yes, thank you, Dun. During my interviews, I heard some carriers are mining data and getting very good material from that, and that they are selling non-disclosed data to third parties. I assume it can be an interesting way to improve earnings, but while it has privacy challenges, I'm wondering what you think about this. Is this something that you think carriers are doing? Is some trends that we are going to see more and more in the future?
Yeah,
So,
maybe Justin.
Yeah, sorry, I'll pick up on that. No, well, yeah, absolutely. I think that there's two things to bear in mind in this. One of which is, yes, privacy is probably the biggest issue, which is holding people back at the moment in this area. You know, so we've seen, for example, in the European market, Telefonica have started this activity with their Telefonica digital services, but Verizon have also done similar things. AT&T's done similar things, and in fact, out of the Asia Pac area, Singtel have done a whole heap of activity in this space as well. So yes, it's busy, but we've got to bear in mind that the advertising market, which is essentially what it's taking money away from, is about a tenth the size of the telco market. So it's still a relatively small market space, and it won't be enough to change the well, it might have a significant effect, I don't think, on telcos in terms of overall revenues. It might give some quite interesting little uplifts here and there, but I think fundamentally it needs something more than that to make a change to some of the telcos.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, and maybe Chris, if you have any insight there, I guess, on those kind of privacy concerns when it comes to kind of analytics.
Sure. I think it's a fantastic question. When I was at CTA last week, it was one of the leading sets of questions we heard, particularly around big data. I think when it comes to privacy, I think you're going to see, number one, a movement towards slightly more lenient privacy from carriers, which I don't think actually is a negative shift as long as we're providing value-added services to the end clients. Certainly, I think where we are in terms of privacy today is using aggregate anonymized data to do things like mobile advertising, location-based services versus using true personal information. And I think that trend will certainly continue.
Got it. And maybe, I guess, a follow-up to that one too, maybe for Justin. I mean, it does seem like in general consumers are becoming maybe a little more open with their information. Obviously, with the different social medias, people don't seem too afraid to be posting a lot of personal information online anymore. I mean, do you see that as perhaps maybe impacting this, I guess, hesitancy from carriers to get too involved in this over time? I mean, obviously, it might take 10 or 15 years, but I mean, do you kind of see as the current people in their 20s and teens are pretty comfortable with this? I think that might, I guess, impact the way carriers view their role in kind of sharing data with others.
Well, no, certainly. I mean, as we know, the younger you are, the more willing you seem to be to use data. I mean, there are some regulatory requirements which enable which do actually restrict telcos at the minute in terms of what they can and can't do. Certainly, take the point that if you normalize it, life's easier. But I suppose there's three levels on this. One of which is a technical issue, which we can deal with. I think that's fairly self-evident that the telcos can deal with today. There's a regulatory one and a legal one, which again you get around that to a certain extent with the normalization of that data. But even using that data, unless you have permission to do it, in some countries is very difficult, even at a anonymized level. And then beyond that, really, there's a social thing. So the classic case on this particular one was, in fact, Telefonica, who launched a normalized data service called Smart Steps within the UK, which is really looking at sort of market research information about location and where people went, and we're using it for things like citing different retail chain outlets, etc., which was fine in the UK, and us Brits were very happy with that. But the same service didn't take place in Germany, and it wasn't for legal reasons, it wasn't for technical reasons. It was just that there was an uproar within that market space. So I think there's a little bit of over time. I'm quite sure that will disappear without a doubt. But there are some challenges as well in terms of what you can expose and what you can't expose, and you just got to make sure you've done the right thing in terms of legalities, and also be absolutely aware that you aren't going to upset your customers in doing this.
Yeah, that's a great point. Actually, you're right. That was brought up, I think, last week at the CTIA show as well. That there are the legal boundaries, not just geographic boundaries when dealing with this. Between different countries, different regulations when it comes to sharing information. So that is a bit of a challenge for maybe some of these larger carriers that have international operations across multiple countries. It's kind of how to implement this safely across all your different operations. So an interesting point there. So. Another question looks like we got in from someone listening in here is, this one might be maybe targeted towards Chris, but someone, I guess, is asking about, I guess, some of the more common pitfalls that carriers might encounter when implementing an overall analytics solution from scratch. Maybe, Chris, you can maybe touch on, I guess, some of those bigger challenges that might come up with implementing an analytics solution.
Sure, happy to. Again, a great question. I think there are definitely a few common pitfalls. Especially when it comes to when we start talking about big data and predictive analytics. I think in general, it's fallen into the IT realm historically. Meaning IT, because it's a technology play, has taken some of that role in putting these systems in place. And I think there's certainly a place for IT to play. However, when I look at this whole space and it's emerging and new. I look at everything sort of in two lenses. One is you're either building a factory or you're building a lab, right? And you need those two things sort of to coexist. When you talk about predictive analytics and big data, you really need to get things off the ground and sort of do that design outside of the realm of the factory. Once you have that, once you have those facets of your technology and your business ironed out, then putting it into the IT factory, if you will, has seen that work much better. So really bringing in outside specialists as one option to say design and build those systems, training IT to then use those systems as well as the business, of course, versus trying to still build it all in house, or secondarily simply outsourcing some of that function, managed by the business and or IT, but outsourcing most of those functions. One of the other big areas is, assuming sort of the data scientist role is a uniform, across different technologies, and it's really not. You have, data scientists who are, experts in big data platforms, Hadoop and Netezza, Teradata, and others, but you also have, data scientists who are experts in actually monetizing, or data mining that information and creating value out of it. You have data scientists who excel in actually transforming that information into value to the business and integrating with other processes and systems. So I think the realm of the data scientist again also has to be thought about very deeply, and ensuring that you're bringing people in, number one, that have telecommunications expertise, because it is a different industry. It does have different pitfalls than, say, financial services, as well as really discerning between the various types of data scientists that are out there.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I'm going to open it back up to Roberta as well with a question as well on this. But before I do that, I just want to also remind those of you listening in that if you do have any questions for our panel members, to please feel free to use the questions tab there on the GoToWebinar control panel. We've got quite a few questions coming in. We'll try to get to as many as possible, but also want to let you know that we will be sharing these questions with our panel members for perhaps follow-up afterwards too. So please feel free to send those in, and we'll try to get to those if we can. But yeah, now I want to bring Roberta back on, who might have some more questions too for our panel members. Roberta?
Yes, Dan. No, I was just wondering, Chris, is it more difficult to large operators to adopt big data analytics than smaller ones? I ask you that because I heard a lot about how can they manage these big data analytics tools while they have legacy systems, and how they can integrate all.
I think it's again, phenomenal question, Roberta. You're right in some ways. So I look at pros and cons of each of the the various tiers. When I look at tier 1 providers, what they typically have, like as you said, are current systems, legacy systems, and all those things need to be merged and migrated, et cetera, which certainly adds some level of complexity. However, I also think, and this is a generality, so not offending anybody, but the generality is they also have, because they're longer time in business, they have more processes and procedures as well around some of that data and that the data governance. Again, very large generality there, but that also helps propel them in terms of actually bringing some of that data together. And I mean, this is a sort of a global statement. When we look at tier 2 and tier 3, they typically have fewer systems, obviously smaller volumes of data by nature. But because there are systems that have sort of grown up in more so in silos, it becomes harder to cross-govern those systems and bringing those systems together. So it's again, generalities here. I'm sure each can apply to the other tiers. So I think each has its pros and cons at the end of the day, and various sort of pitfalls.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, that sounds good. Well, I know we got some more questions coming in from some of the people listening in. Looks like we got one here for Justin. Let's see. It seems the question is: it seems with a hosted solution, all data would be considered external, since the data would have to be sent and then retrieved as needed. How substantial is the buildup of connections to be able to send and receive data at those sort of volumes? Is that one of the larger costs of such implementation? So I don't know if Justin, if you have any insight into I guess that part of it.
No, well, it's an interesting point actually, and certainly one worth considering. When data gets to a certain size, to move it around is a real difficulty. And whether that be pushing internally or externally, and indeed even analyzing it. When it gets to a certain size, it gets even with the latest and largest processing efforts and everything else, it becomes a real issue. And there are some techniques around that by doing it in as processing that information as it comes in. And of course, you don't send all the data sets around and dealing with it. But clearly, for a hosted solution, that may be something Chris can pick up. But I think that probably what he'd be doing would be picking up certain elements of that data, not the whole lot. And even maybe working through it before it actually gets stored. So you're sort of doing a sort of store and analyze. You're doing a sort of an analyze and then store. So you're actually doing some work on it prior to that particular point of moving large amounts of data around. But no, certainly it's a key point, and certainly as that data builds up over the years, the ability to move huge amounts of stored data around becomes a real problem, and one needs to be considered.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if Chris, if you have any insight, maybe into I guess that challenge of the costs associated with trying to, again, we are dealing with big data, so obviously a lot of information getting moved around here. So maybe your insight, I guess, into that challenge for implementation.
Sure. From a cost perspective, actually, it's not typically the costs are fairly nominal because just in our case, and I'm sure other providers in our space are doing the same. We're using centralized. Very commonly used data centers, and so our clients typically have ties into those data centers already. So it's not setting up a whole new secure pipe; it's actually increasing the size of existing pipes into those data centers. So it has not been an issue, and I mean we're getting fairly large volumes, up to from one client alone, 16 terabytes a day, sort of at the peak, billions of records. It is a process to get that set up initially. But the cost itself has not been burdensome.
Got it. Okay, good to know. Well, looks like let's see, we got some more questions here, and I definitely want to make sure Roberta can get another question into as well. But before we go to Roberta with any final questions, looks like someone is asking. This might be maybe for Justin, but also I'm sure Chris can have some insight too. Asking about do you see the wireless network analysis functions eventually being part of big data analytics platform? So I guess bringing in those two together. I don't know if Justin, if you see a trend towards that, or what's your view on those kind of working together more closely going forward.
So yeah, Kenny, again, I mean it's probably one of the use cases I've got, but yeah, certainly the linkage between things like policy management, PCRF, for example, and or indeed wireless data design, etc., and even things like software-defined networks are coming down the line. Clearly, the ability to look at a whole heap of data, analyze that, and then dynamically go back around and actually reconfigure and optimize that network is something which is possible. And whether you call that big data or not, it certainly enables the same technology enables those sorts of optimization techniques to be used. And certainly, I would expect over time for that to increase. There's a whole heap of different points which were originally done essentially by a very manual process. you know, were expensive, time-consuming, and all the rest of it, and required people with very large brains to work out. Can be done now a more automated way with a far greater data set than there has been in the past. So yes, I would expect that those sorts of use cases would pick up and continue to pick up over time as we come to more software-orientated networks. Got it. And maybe Chris, any thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, I think two major points. I think absolutely agree with Justin. I think that is definitely coming down the road. The way that we look at the world of analytics really is not by data itself or the data silos or different components that exist, but looking at it as a whole. So if I'm looking for doing things like managing my network, I'm looking actually across multiple data sets. So network data is very important for doing, say, for instance, usage forecasting by type of usage. I have to understand things like what are my marketing campaigns? What's my marketing spend? How many more, iPhone 5s, and 4Ss am I going to sell over the next X number of days, weeks, months? And then how's that going to impact my network? So I think that usage information, that network information actually comes into play to do things like network planning, predictive maintenance, and other sorts of things, and gets combined naturally with the other systems that maybe it hasn't been combined with before, such as campaign management, billing systems and things of that nature. The second area I think is really around adaptive analytics, sort of what's beyond predictive analytics, and that is what really big data allows all of us to do, right? Being able to be very adaptive to the change in nature. We have lots of clients who can store 30 or 45 or 60 days worth of CDR data online. Well, big data allows you to keep more than that. So you don't have to worry about, I have to wait for data to come in, or I have to restore data in my big data platform in order to make decisions that I need to make today. It enables you to make those decisions and do that analysis today. So when we start talking about, SDN and other sorts of, I'll say newer network technologies that are coming out, big data is going to allow for real-time SDN, predictive SDN versus reactive SDN.
Got it. That makes sense. Okay, that makes sense. I think someone had kind of asked a similar question along those lines about, again, kind of the impact of this on network planning, and obviously with smartphones becoming more and more prevalent and tablets coming on the market and LTE really pushing that data use case for consumers, it does seem like this is becoming a pretty important part of data planning or network planning going forward too for carriers. So interesting insight there. So well, I definitely wanted to send it over to Roberta for maybe a final question as well. So Roberta, I don't know if you have a final question you want to ask to panel members too.
Yes, we have here a very interesting questions. It says why aren't Tier 2 and 3 North American wireless operators looking at data monetization? At CTIA, T-Mobile and Sprint indicated that they are not currently looking at this type of opportunity. What do you both think, Chris and Justin?
Chris, do you go first?
Sure, I'll take this. So it's a great question. I actually just did our own assessment of this market and what we're seeing really across the board, specifically for Tier 2s and 3s in North America, and even Tier 1s, in other parts of the world. Data monetization is sort of a secondary or tertiary event for them, and I think part of that is certainly because of, especially in other parts of the world, the market saturation isn't there yet. In terms of North America, I think that there's a little bit of catch-up to be done in the Tier 2, Tier 3 market. Again, there's lots of R&D and other money put behind some of these more advanced approaches, and those things have been honed over the course of time for the Tier 1s. And I believe, just generalizing here, Tier 2s and Tier 3s have a bit of that catching up to do from the Tier 1s, which is just a natural part of the evolution of the space. I think it's not going to be a long tail. I think in the next 12 to 18 months, we'll see the Tier 2s and Tier 3s catch up very quickly on that data monetization. The other piece of this is it's also, in many cases, cheaper to be the follower than it is to be the leader, and trying to break new ground and taking some of those large investments up front. Tier 1s have typically more ability to do that.
Got it. And maybe just if you have any insight, maybe what you're seeing in North America, but maybe also in other markets as well when it comes to kind of the rollout of these services, I guess trickling down from the big guys down to the smaller guys.
Yeah. So Verizon, I think someone's put a question is it's precision markets, and it's already out there for the tier ones. I mean, again, to my point I made earlier on, I think that it's still a very early market. There's still very modest amounts of revenue coming from it, which makes it less attractive for people to get involved with it at this particular moment in time. But if it catches on, clearly it's going to be an area which everyone's going to be getting involved with. But it's still very early days, not just in North America. If you look across the globe at the revenues derived from this area, it's still very, very modest indeed. So there are other things, and maybe Chris is right, sort of a tertiary sort of consideration really at the moment. But it depends what people's appetite are for some of these newer service types. My guess is that this isn't going to make any significant difference for a number of years yet in terms of revenues. But as a long-term bet, maybe it's something to consider.
Yeah, good points there. And obviously, I mean, speaking with some of the carriers at the show last week, it does seem like that there is again some interest in this. But again, I think a lot of the smaller guys at least are just trying to get implementation out there and trying to just do the basic at this point. Whereas maybe more of the vendors are kind of pushing for showing these carriers what additional benefits they can glean from this sort of implementation. So yeah, like you guys said, it seems like one of those things that maybe over the short term we'll start seeing a ramp up in carriers taking advantage of what they can really mine from their network. So good responses there, guys. Definitely appreciate that. Well, it looks like we're just about out of time here. Our hour's just about up. I definitely want to thank everyone for listening in. We did have quite a few questions that we didn't get to, but like I said before, we'll be sharing these questions with our panel members for possible follow-up after the webinar, and also feel free to ping anyone that you need to with the email addresses there for any specific questions too, and hopefully we can get some answers back to you as well. But again, I want to thank all of you for listening in. I also want to special thanks to our panel members. Thanks Roberta, Prescott, who just did a report for us, and again, you can check out that report on the RCRWireless.com website. Also, thanks to Justin from Analysys Mason for providing some insight, and also to Chris from Razorsight for providing kind of the inside view there of this market too. So definitely appreciate you guys helping out today. Thanks so much for that. And again, thanks everyone for listening in, and have a great afternoon. Thanks so much.